The Keeper of Tales has returned with another original story I believe will stay with you long after it ends. Before we begin, please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of the supernatural and unknown. So now sit back, relax, and journey with me to a quiet Oregon lake.
Finally, the day had come for our annual camping trip. Mom never came with us. Not because she didn't care, but because when Justice and I were younger, those trips had started as Dad's way of bonding with us. It started in our backyard and grew from there over time. As we got older, it just stayed that way. Mom stayed behind, and the three of us went out into the wilderness. It was only a few weeks before the beginning of summer. According to my father, Michael, it was the perfect time for camping. Not too cold and not too hot. I had already packed my gear twice, not because of nerves, but because I had become accustomed to my father's teachings, and they had never steered me wrong. I stood in the garage doorway, staring at my older brother, Justice. He was crouched beside the open bed of Dad's truck, trying to make room for the last cooler. Justice had turned 18 3 weeks earlier and had begun to think too highly of himself. He walked around the house like life had revealed all its secrets to him alone, and he was the only one smart enough to understand them. My stuff was fine where it was, I said. Justice didn't even bother looking up. Your stuff was in the way. My stuff was clipped down. It was clipped down in the way. Justice was always making things far more difficult than they needed to be. I guess my temper got the best of me, because I stormed over and yanked my backpack out of his hands. We argued, said things only a brother and sister would say to each other. Mean little things that knew exactly where to land. Dad put an end to our little war before it could get any worse. You two cut it out. Justice, go inside and make sure we haven't left anything behind. Myra, make sure everything is tied down and organized. Justice glanced over his shoulder as he walked away and mouthed something I couldn't make out. I wasn't the best at reading lips, and he knew it. About 15 minutes later, Justice came out of the house carrying a canvas duffel in one hand and a long, hard case in the other. He handed them to me without saying a word. It didn't take me long to get everything tied down and organized inside the truck. 3 internal frame packs sat in the bed, each with a sleeping bag compressed tight and strapped beneath it. A small axe was sheathed and secured. Coils of paracord were clipped to loops. Rain covers were tucked into side pockets. Water filters, fire starters, headlamps, spare batteries, compact first aid kits, gloves, maps sealed in plastic sleeves, and fixed blade knives were all packed exactly where Dad had taught us to put them. We had everything packed for the trip. That was how he was about the woods. Everything had a place. Everything had a purpose. And if something went wrong, he believed preparation gave you a fighting chance. Dad stood at the back of the truck with his hands on his hips, looking over our work. When I looked over at him, there was this proud look on his face. It is one of the last memories I have of my father happy. Dad, as always, gave everything the once-over and gave us our rules for the road. Justice, in the back. Myra, up with me. We will switch on the way back. Now let's have a safe ride and no horseplay. And with that, we were off. There was nothing about the ride out to the cabin that stood out to me. It was as uneventful as a road trip could be, I guess. Dad drove. Justice sat in the back with his earphones on, bouncing between sleep and scrolling through his phone. I spent most of the ride staring out the window, watching the buildings disappear and the trees take their place along the roadside. When we finally got to the cabin, things went like they always had. We unpacked, moved everything inside, and got settled with the kind of practiced efficiency Dad had drilled into us since we were little. The cabin wasn't all that big. It had what most cabins had, I guess. Each of us had our own room with a bed and a place to store our gear. There was a decent-sized living room with a fireplace, a couch, and a sofa near it. The cabin also had a kitchen and a dining area. I always thought of the place as cozy, right down to the swing out on the porch. It wasn't one of those big cabins you see in movies, with upstairs bedrooms and a huge stone fireplace stretching up to the ceiling. But it was nice, and it was ours. After we got settled, Dad cooked dinner, and we all sat at the table talking about what we wanted to do the next day. During the drive, I had mentioned that I wanted to do some fishing. Dad told me about a spot he had found near the lake where the fish were supposed to bite pretty good. He said he would take me, so my plans were set. Justice decided he would stay behind and rest up for our hike to the peak, which was something we always did before the trip was over. I still remember the first time we made that hike. Back then, I lagged behind almost the whole way, huffing and complaining while Dad and Justice kept stopping to wait on me. But not anymore. Now I can keep up. As the night got heavier, we all went to sleep. The next morning, I woke to find Dad and Justice had made breakfast. That surprised me, because Justice was usually the one trudging into the kitchen to feast on whatever Dad and I had prepared. It felt good that morning to be the one doing the trudging for once. After breakfast, I went and sat out on the porch swing. The day was pleasant. There was a cool breeze moving through the trees, and the birds were busy chirping and flying about. I just sat there, letting the warmth of the sun touch my face as I took it all in. It was just like Dad had said, not too hot, not too cold. I wasn't sure how long Dad had been standing there before his voice came from behind me. "You ready to get going, Chipmunk?" Dad had called me that since I was a little girl. He always said I was his little chipmunk. I never complained. Truth was, I sort of liked it. I told him I was ready, and we grabbed our poles and bait. Justice stood out on the porch and watched us as we made our way down the trail. The way to the spot wasn't all that complicated. I thought for sure there would be some secret trail or hidden path Dad had discovered, but there wasn't any of that. Now, don't get me wrong. It was a little off the beaten path, but it didn't take much work to get there. Once we arrived, Dad couldn't stop giving me tips. "Oh, you've been fishing," he said, with that matter-of-fact look on his face. "But now I'm gonna teach you how to really fish." I just stood there and watched as he showed me things, most of which I already knew. After the lessons, we settled in and sat on a big, weathered log beside the lake. Dad said the fish would be biting. But an hour passed, and there wasn't the slightest tug on either of our lines. I was beginning to think that this would be a lost cause when my line went tight. I snatched up my pole and began reeling the line in. In the span of about 30 minutes, I had caught 3 medium-sized fish, but Dad hadn't caught any himself. It was getting late in the day when Dad's line caught something. It snatched the pole out almost into the lake before Dad grabbed it. He began reeling it in, but this fish had to be far bigger than any I had caught, because I watched as the pole bowed and Dad followed it along the shoreline. I could see the muscles flexing in his arms as he pulled and reeled with the rod tight in his hands. Although he was working so hard, I could see the joy on his face. In that moment, I was sure he was happy to finally have a fish of his own to catch. It wasn't too long before he had the fish in hand and smiling from ear to ear, talking about how big it was. But the more I looked at it, it looked like no fish I had ever seen. Its scales were as black as night, its eyes just as black. I wouldn't have noticed them if they hadn't been darting back and forth, and at that moment, it was as if it locked eyes with me. I asked him what kind of fish that was. He looked at me puzzled and then at the fish he was holding in his hand. He stared at it with a puzzled look on his face. He turned to look back at me, and that's when it bit him. Dad winced in pain, cursing as he dropped the fish back into the lake. It hit the water with a heavy splash and vanished beneath the surface before I could get another look at it. "Dad!" I said. He didn't answer. He knelt at the shoreline, dipping his bleeding hand into the water. For a few seconds, he just stayed there, kneeling there with one hand in the lake and the other braced against his knee. I thought he was cleaning the bite, or maybe catching his breath. Then he stood up. "I don't know. Something just seemed different." He spoke. "RM." "What?" I asked, The sound from his mouth was more like a mumble. I realize now it was my name backwards, but at that moment, standing there by the lake with the sun dropping behind the trees, I was just confused. "Myra?" he said again, but this time I could make it out. "Dad, you okay?" He just stood there looking at me with this glazed-over look in his eyes. There was this ripple over his face, like a pebble being thrown into a still body of water. I stepped back. Then Dad grinned, mouth wide, skin stretched. He stumbled as he stepped towards me. It was like his legs had gone to sleep from kneeling by the lake for so long. "Myra, wrong woods," he said. "Dad, you're scaring me." "Aw, don't be scared. I just want to taste, oops." It sounded as if two voices were coming out of my father's mouth at once. Then he just began to laugh like some crazed maniac. I froze, stood there wide-eyed, watching as Dad's body moved in ways I didn't think were possible. I screamed at him, shouted his name, asked questions I don't even remember asking, cursed, begged, did anything I could think of to make him answer me. But the laughing never stopped. I didn't know what else to do, so I ran back to the cabin as fast as I could. By the time I got back to the cabin, the sun had just about fully set. I burst through the front door, breathing hard, slammed it shut behind me, and stood there trying to make sense of what had just happened. Justice looked up right away. "Where's Dad?" I couldn't answer. I didn't even know what to say. I just leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath, while everything I had seen kept running through my mind. The fish, the bite, the way Dad stood up from the lake, the way he said my name wrong. Justice asked me again, but by then it all just came bursting out. I don't even remember if I told it in the right order. By the time I was done, Justice looked at me like I had lost my damn mind. I remember this silly grin spreading across his face. "You and Dad trying to play some kind of prank on me?" he asked. "Well, it ain't gonna work." I grabbed him by the shoulders and screamed right in his face. "Dad is not Dad. Something is wrong with him. This ain't no damn joke." That grin disappeared. I saw it happen. One second, he was my brother thinking I was messing with him. The next, he was looking at me like he finally understood I wasn't playing. And right on cue, like something straight out of a late-night horror movie, we heard Dad coming up the trail shouting my name.
Myra!
Justice and I looked at each other, then toward the window. I whispered, "That's not Dad. No matter what he says or does, we can't let him get in."
Myra!
Justice didn't argue. He just moved.
Myra!
He shoved the couch against the front door, then rushed into the kitchen and pushed the fridge up against the back door. Then he disappeared down the hall and came back with both of our hatchets. He handed one to me. I took it, but deep down I was praying I wouldn't have to use it against my father. Dad's voice getting louder and louder as he came up the trail.
Myra! Myra!
Then the porch boards creaked. He stood outside the door, swaying back and forth without saying a word. I watched the doorknob turn. "Myra," he said, "why'd you lock the door?" Justice swallowed hard. "Dad, what's going on?" "Justice?" Dad said. "Is that you?" Justice's face changed. "What are you talking about? Did you forget I was here too?" Then everything went quiet. I moved closer to the window and parted the curtain just enough to peek outside. Dad was standing there on the porch, still as a post. It didn't even look like he was breathing. Justice pulled away from the window he had been looking out of and started moving through the cabin, checking every lock. I did the same. By then, it was pitch black outside. For a few moments, there was nothing. No talking, no knocking. Just Justice and me standing inside that cabin, holding those hatchets and listening. Then the back door rattled. Justice turned toward the kitchen so fast I thought he was going to trip over his own feet. He ran over and pressed his back against the fridge like his weight alone was going to be enough to keep whatever was outside from getting in. The doorknob rattled again. like a burglary testing the door to see if it would open. Then came his voice from the other side of the door. "You locked this one too?" Justice didn't answer. Dad laughed. It wasn't that crazy laugh from the lake. This one was quieter, almost amused. "You two really did listen to him, didn't you?" I didn't like the way it said that. Him. Like Dad was somebody else. Like he was talking about someone standing in line at a grocery store. Justice looked at me from the kitchen, and even in the dim lights in the kitchen, I could see the fear on his face. Then it moved again. We heard the footsteps leave the back porch, walking slowly along the side of the cabin. Justice came back into the living room, breathing hard through his nose. The footsteps stopped outside one of the side windows. For a second, I could see his shape through the curtain, just standing there. Then there was a loud crash as a hand came smashing through the glass. It was so sudden that I screamed before I could stop myself. Justice raised his hatchet and rushed toward the window, but he stopped when we heard it scream out in pain, a real sound of pain. I looked through the curtains of the window next to the broken window and watched as it stared at the hand that had just smashed through the window. It cursed as it looked down at the hand. For a moment, it sounded like Dad again, like my father had cut himself doing something stupid and was mad about it. Then that voice slipped underneath. "This body," it said. It sounded annoyed, not hurt, annoyed. "This won't work." Justice and I didn't move. Outside, we could hear it breathing hard. "So fragile," it said. "Blood, pain. At this rate, this body will be useless by morning." It went quiet. Then it laughed once. Guess I had better be more careful. It stepped away from the broken window and stood there for a few seconds. I thought that maybe it was going to leave. Then the porch boards creaked again. It had come back around to the front. Justice backed up until he was near the kitchen again, putting himself between me and the hallway. I stayed by the couch, pressed against the front door, both hands wrapped around the hatchet handle. It didn't try the knob this time. It didn't knock. It sat down. I knew that sound. The old porch swing creaked under the weight. That sound used to mean peace to me. It used to mean mornings with hot chocolate, evenings with Dad telling us some story he had probably made up halfway through. But out there in the dark, that sound made my stomach twist. The swing creaked once, then again. Then it spoke in Dad's voice. "You remember this swing, Chipmunk?" I closed my eyes tight as Justice whispered, "Don't answer him." I wasn't going to. But even though I didn't respond, it kept talking anyway. "You were small the first time I brought you here. Smaller than I thought a child could be and still make that much noise." The swing creaked again. "You sat right beside me on this porch, asking 1,000 questions, and your brother went inside because he said mosquitoes were eating him alive, but you stayed out here with me." It happened just as it had said it happened. I could see it. That was the worst part. I could see it because it was true. I remembered sitting beside Dad on that swing. I remembered the way my feet didn't touch the porch. I remembered leaning against his arm while the woods got dark around us. Dad's voice softened. "You asked me if there were monsters in the woods. Do you remember what I told you?" I did. I remembered. He told me there were no monsters out there that could get past him. The thing outside laughed quietly, like it had found that memory funny. He believed that too. I could see Justice's grip tighten on his hatchet as I looked over at him. I wanted to scream at whatever was sitting outside. I wanted to tell it to shut up. I wanted to tell it that it had no right using his voice, no right sitting in that swing, no right poisoning memories that didn't belong to it. But I didn't say a word, and neither did Justice. We stayed like that for the rest of the night. Justice with his back against the fridge, me with my back against the couch by the front door. Both of us holding hatchets like we were ready to use them, even though I don't know if either of us really could have. Every now and then the swing would creak. Sometimes that thing or whatever had taken over Dad's body talked. Sometimes it hummed. And then, after a while, there was nothing. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't think I really did. I think my body just shut off for a few seconds at a time and then jerked itself awake again. By the time gray morning light started pressing through the windows, both Justice and I had not moved an inch the whole night. Justice was the first one to move. He looked at me, then toward the front window. I shook my head. He looked anyway. He moved slow, parting the curtain just enough to see outside. For a second, he didn't say anything. Then he whispered, "He's gone." I looked out the window and at the swing on the porch. It wasn't there, but that really didn't make me feel any better. Dad was gone now, and neither of us had a clue where he had gone. There was blood on the broken glass near the side window. A few drops on the porch, too. Not much, just enough to prove to us that the night before had happened. Justice didn't waste time. He grabbed the keys from Dad's jacket hanging near the door, and we got out of that cabin. Justice knew how to drive only because Dad had taught him the year before. He only had his learner's permit, but we just got out of there as fast as we could. I kept looking behind us the whole way down that road. Every bend, every tree line, every shadow. I kept expecting to see Dad standing there. We eventually found help at a ranger station. I don't remember everything we said. I know we told them Dad was missing. I know I cried. Between the tears and question, we didn't tell them the truth. Not all of it. I mean, what were we supposed to say? That Dad caught something from the lake that changed him? That he sat outside the cabin all night talking like something had crawled inside him and was sorting through his memories? It all just felt like we were in a horror movie. No, we told them he got hurt, that he started acting strange, that he wandered off after dark and never came back. They searched for him for 3 days. Rangers, police, volunteers, people with dogs. They found signs that somebody had been moving through the woods. A little blood near the cabin, some prints by the lake, a piece of torn fabric that might have come from Dad's jacket. But they never found him. After that, we went home. Mom was a wreck. She must have driven those people crazy trying to get them to stay out there looking for Dad. But it had already been 3 days of them searching every inch of that place. She just sat at the dining room table, staring down at the wood like she was trying to burn a hole through it. When she first got to the ranger station, I still remember the way she grabbed us when she saw us. She held Justice first, then me, then both of us together like she was afraid if she let go, we would disappear too. But now, seeing her sitting at that table, she looked like she had aged 10 years in 3 days. We didn't tell her everything right away. I know how that sounds, I do. But we couldn't. Not then. Every time I looked at her, I saw the way she was waiting for Dad to come through the door behind us. Like if she just kept looking past our shoulders long enough, he would appear there with that tired smile on his face and say it was all some misunderstanding. So we told her what we told everybody else. Dad went missing. Dad got hurt. Dad disappeared in the woods. We waited until later to tell her the rest. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe everything after that was. When Justice and I finally told her what happened, she didn't yell. I almost wish she had. She just sat there at the kitchen table, looking at us like she was trying to love us through what she thought was some kind of breakdown. I always wondered about love after that. People talk about it like it's always this great thing, and maybe most of the time it is. But I learned love can also make you blind. It can make you believe something impossible, just because the truth hurts too bad to accept. Even when your own children are standing right in front of you, trying to warn you. She said we had been through something horrible. She said trauma could twist memories. She said fear could make people see things that weren't there. I remember Justice slamming his hand on the table and telling her we knew what we saw. Mom cried. I think she just didn't know what to do. She wanted Dad, her husband, back, and now her kids were telling her this crazy story. She must have thought she lost her family. I guess in some ways she did. 2 months passed. 2 months of Mom calling the police. 2 months of Mom checking the news. 2 months of Justice sleeping with a bat beside his bed and me waking up from dreams where Dad sat outside my window on that porch swing calling me Chipmunk. Then one evening, as we sat eating at the dining room table, a knock came from the front door. Mom answered it, and there he was. Dad. Same fishing pants, same jacket, same boots. The clothes were torn up a bit and stained with old blood. His face was thinner. His beard had grown. He looked like a man who had been lost in the woods and somehow crawled his way back home. Mom screamed his name and threw herself into his arms. I wanted to grab her, to stop her. Justice and I didn't move, not one step. As they hugged standing in the doorway, it looked over Mom's shoulder at us. His eyes looked normal. His smile looked normal. Everything about him looked just close enough to normal that I understood right then how easy it would be for other people to believe. But Justice and I knew. There was nothing in its appearance. It didn't burst into laughter this time. It wasn't swinging on the porch. It was just a twisting in my gut that gave me pause. That was not my father. I could see the look of fear on Justice's when I looked over at him. We couldn't take it. So that night, we told Mom we wanted to leave. We said we wanted to stay with our cousin in Texas for a while. Mom didn't understand. Of course she didn't. Dad was back. In her mind, that meant the worst was over. She talked and tried to get us to stay, but there was no way in hell I was going to be in the same house with that thing. After a bit of arguing and begging, she eventually agreed. I think part of her believed distance would help us heal. So we left. For the first few weeks, Mom called every day. At first, she sounded like herself. Tired, worried, but herself. She told us Dad was quiet, that he was having a hard time, that he barely slept, that sometimes she caught him standing in rooms like he had forgotten why he walked into them. She said the doctors thought it was shock, exposure, memory problems, all those normal words people use when they're trying to explain something they don't truly understand. Then the calls started getting shorter. Mom would pause too long before answering questions. Sometimes she repeated herself. Sometimes she called Justice by Dad's name. Once, she called me Chipmunk. Mom had never called me that. Not once. After that, Justice stopped pretending he wasn't scared. Then the calls stopped altogether. We tried calling her. No answer. We called neighbors, but nobody had seen either of them in days. Eventually, Justice and I went back to the house. When we got there, the house looked abandoned. Their cars were still in the driveway. The front door was locked. Inside, everything looked almost normal. Almost. There were dishes in the sink. Mom's purse was on the kitchen counter with what looked like the contents poured out, and Dad's jacket was hanging by the door. But they were gone. Both of them. No note, no blood, no sign of a struggle. Just gone. People ask me later what I thought happened. I don't know. I really don't. Maybe we should have done more. Maybe we should have made Mom believe us. Maybe Justice and I should have killed whatever came back wearing our father before it ever reached that house. I've thought about that in my head more times than I can count. But all I know is this. Something came out of that lake. Something old. Something patient. And now it's out there somewhere, wearing the faces of the two people who raised us. The police still call them missing. Justice doesn't. Neither do I.
Talk about making a change in your life. Now that was some nasty work, taking a loving father from his family like that. Be careful out there. The person you woke up with this morning may not be the same person you go to sleep with tonight. Who knows what lies just beneath the skin? If you like stories like this, be sure to tune in next time. And as always, should you find yourself lost along your travels, let our light be your guide.